I would like to introduce our artist tonight, Matt Barter. Hi, Matt.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Matt Barter is a self-taught artist. He paints, carves, and sculpts. His motifs focus on the earthy beauty of Maine's landscape and her working waterfronts. His fishermen are not out lobstering and fishing, but going about their chores on shore. His carved fishermen and wood reliefs are fast becoming collectible, made from reclaimed wood beams, found objects, and oil paint. These rough-cut figures capture the brawn of the weathered men and women of Down East Maine. Matt was raised in Sullivan, which is down east, and learned to paint under the guidance of his father, the acclaimed Maine artist, Philip Barter. He sold his first painting at the age of 10 and was learning the mechanics of oil painting and making his own wood reliefs as a teen. Matt lives with his wife, Rebecca, and their 2 sons in Brunswick, Maine. And I'll turn this over to you, Matt, to give us a little introduction to the Cantown show.
Excellent. So how do you arrive at a place like this? It takes a long time. It took me about 5 years to get this show from start to finish to where we are. I couldn't have done it without the help of my wife, Rebecca, and my mom and my dad, especially my dad. We started this show together about 5 years ago. We started talking about the end of the canning industry, the impact it had on the local environment and the culture. And it didn't really become a big story to me until I found an archived New York Times article from probably 2014 about it was called The End of the Line. The last American seafood cannery ended in Winter Harbor, Prospect Harbor, which is only about 25 miles from here. And so when I read that, I realized that this wasn't, a Downey story. This was an American story. And it made it a bigger one for me and something that was more exciting to get involved with. So me and my dad started out discussing how do we approach this big story. There were hundreds of canneries up and down the coast employing thousands of people. And to me, that was quite daunting. So I didn't know where to begin. I started painting can labels because I was fascinated with the vintage can labels. They were just beautiful, well done. So I started painting my own versions of them. But then I realized that's not the story of the end of the canning industry. That was just the graphic art that went on the cans. And then I started another tack and I thought, why don't I look at the factories? But that became another daunting task. And it kind of looked more steampunk than I wanted to make. It was going away in the wrong direction. So me and my dad said, why don't we drive up to Lubec and we'll go to the historical museum up in Lubec. We'll tour Eastport and that area to kind of get a vibe for where the canneries were and the people. And so the Historical Society closes on October 31st. We went up on October 31st. And it was an interesting experience. I love it up there. It's such a beautiful area. We went to the smokehouse first in Lubec, which was absolutely amazing. It's this old smokehouse right over the water. And they smoke the fish there forever. And even though it's been shut down for 20 years, you go in there and you get this incredible smoky fish smell. That sounds disgusting, but it was actually quite a wonderful smell. It was a very homey sort of smell that just intoxicated you. And I love that aspect of the tour that we did of Lubec. And then we went to the Historical Museum, which ended up being a very kooky tour of a museum. I wouldn't really call it a museum so much as a personal private collection, more or less. And it didn't have the cannery vibe. The focus of the museum was on a few of the affluent families of Lubec, which I thought was a little bit skewed from the real history of Lubec. And I thought we had kind of crapped out. I thought we didn't have anything to work from. And as I was about to leave, there was a glass case with some awards or medals in it. And right in the middle was this little tiny little token. It was a Cannery Company store token. And I couldn't take any pictures because of the rules of the museum. So it kind of got caught in my mind as we drove back home from Lubec, this little token from this company store. And it got the gears moving. And I thought to myself, I want to make a company store. And I want to fill that company store with whatever the heck I want to make, basically. And from there, I really sort of went into a really downward spiral, but into a really kind of beautiful place. And so the company store was basically, how do you make a company store? Which cannery do you focus on? And then I got overwhelmed again. And then I thought to myself, well, what would a writer do? A literary writer would make up a place, a fictional place to tell a real story. And then I thought, I can do that. I'll make up my own Maine town. And so I came up with this town called Cantown. And with it, I could put all of my hopes and dreams within that imaginary place. Everything I ever wanted to make or do, I could make a part of that fictional story. I could put whatever characters I wanted in there, the people, the items. And so then I got really excited and I worked for about a year and a half. And that was in 2018 into 2019. My dad's approach, interestingly, was, in my mind, more of a first-hand approach because he was of the generation that was part of that canning industry more than me. He would have the opportunity to come and go into them. I think one of our relatives owned a cannery in Booth Bay, so he kind of had those memories and he worked for them and he made the most beautiful paintings of the interiors of the canneries. One of them of the wharf looking up into a cannery building. I didn't have all of that wealth of information, so I had to kind of work for more on my imagination. So this is more sci-fi than it is reality. It's what I imagine the canneries to be and what they were. And so if you look around, when you look through the slides, you'll see this sort of the hat brim worker, the Down East kid. That's kind of the profile that I've been working on. You'll see other ones. We'll wait to go through the slides on that. So anyways, when I went into the company store, I made my own cans out of wood. Some of them have hand-painted labels. Some of them have printed labels. And I filled a shelf with all these little items. I made my own hats with my own brands, kind of just like for my own sort of entertainment, I guess you could say. I made jewelry, different things that you might not imagine being. I made a can of milk, a soda bottle, B&M baked beans, which now is defunct and gone. Another ironic cannery story within our generation, which closed after I made those cans.
Well, Matt, on the screen there's a picture of day workers.
Yes, we can talk about that.
Yeah, well, we just talk about them briefly. That's the first painting we have up here for the people that came in. You saw it hanging on the wall outside.
Right.
And it just shows the people heading into work with their lunch boxes. It's made quite a nice.
I like to imagine them getting there at like 5 in the morning. I was told that when each cannery had its own whistle, so that when the boats would come in, because they would only open when the fish would come in to work. So if there's a boatload of fish that would come in, and there would be a certain whistle for each cannery. This is all stories of people who have actually come to the show and related them to me firsthand. And that kind of thing is, I love that, getting information from the ground, the grassroots information. So they told me that when there's 5 canneries in Lubeck, let's say, and they would hear their whistle and they would say, oh, that's my factory, I've got to go to work. I mean, can you imagine what a crazy life that was? You're in the middle of eating dinner and all of a sudden you hear that doot doot, oh man, I gotta get out of here. So you run out the door and you go to work, or you hear a whistle and you're like, yeah, that's not my factory. I can sit here and have some more coffee, Alan's coffee brandy while I'm waiting.
I know a friend of mine from Ellsworth, her grandmother worked in the Stinson Cannery up in Prospect Harbor, and her name is Vanny Alley, and she and her 3 sisters worked there. I think Vanny worked there for 40 years, and she said every day the bus would come in to Jonesport, and all the women would get on the bus, and it would take them to the cannery where they worked all day. And in that case, the cannery store was kind of convenient because these women didn't have time to shop. They also didn't have transportation because this was back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. So in one hand, the company store was convenient for the women so they could shop. On the other hand, it also kept the workers indebted to the company because they extended credit, and et cetera. But
I think they're predatory. Especially
Yes.
when, if they rented from the factory as well, they were sort of in this sort of
Yes,
bubble where they could never increase their wealth.
but they did work long hours. And so when you think of, getting to the grocery store and all those kind of things must have been
Right.
equally as,
Yeah. And if you've ever been that
difficult.
way, it's very isolated. So
It is very isolated. And this one, it was when people didn't have their own vehicle, a lot of people. I think my friend said that her grandparents didn't have running water. When they finally got running water, something happened to the septic system. And it was kind of a hassle, so they never fixed it because they'd been without running water their whole life. So it was like no big deal to them. They're just going to continue on.
sounds
But
like
they,
my kind of people.
that's right. They have that kind of spirit, you know what I
Right,
mean?
yeah.
Yeah. So this next slide,
It's
Matt.
a time punch clock.
Yeah, it's a sculpture. It's right in the back of the room for the people there in the audience.
So I'm fascinated by the time punch clock as well. You go in and you put that little piece of paper in and it stamps it, whatever time you go in and when you leave. And kind of that was part of the getting into the factory idea of it. And that helped me to sort of switch my gears into, okay, I'm going to make some pieces that are more about the inside of the factory, which I worked on in the 2021 series that I worked on.
This next piece is right here. It's called the Cannery Line. It shows the women. Well, you want to tell about it, Matt?
Yeah, when I first started, I had no idea what the story was. And then looking through historical pictures, I realized and found out that most of the people that worked in the factories were women because they were very fast, very diligent, hard workers with an eye for detail. And I didn't know, but they used scissors to cut the heads and tails off the fish. And so that's why you'll see a lot of the pieces have that continuing thread of the women with the scissors. And so this one was the first one that I actually made a piece with the women cutting the heads and the tails. And it actually has working pieces, almost like a piece of folk art, like a folk art toy, where you can turn it and the conveyor belt moves and the fish move along the line. And I love folk art. I think it's, one of the more interesting forms of art where people would just make something because they wanted to, not because they wanted to be an important artist or they wanted to do anything special. They wanted to make a toy for their kids because they didn't have a toy store nearby. And so they made these little whirly gigs and different things. And so this one kind of has that vibe.
Yeah, I also, from what I understand too, my friend, her name is Cindy, she went to visit her grandmother at the cannery, and she said they worked so fast that because they pieceworked, that their hands were a blur. You couldn't even see their hands. They worked so fast. And the sad part is, though, their hands were all cut up all the time. And I've actually poked myself a couple of times on the scissors on that sculpture. So I could appreciate how sharp they probably were.
So more to that is that was a sense of pride for these women, was how fast they could be. And I guess there was fish canning contests that were held in Rockland every year. My friend did a mini documentary about it. And they would set these women up with cans and fish, and they would just go as fast as their hands could move, and they would get an award. But it was a point of pride for these women that they could make as much as their husbands, and that they could work, just as hard and do this. So it was a very interesting story. Also, I think a lot of the backstory to the women working in the factories was when the men went off to war, the women went into the factories, and in down East Maine, they went into the canneries. And they made a living, they supported the family. And then when the husbands came home, they said, well, I'm just going to stay right here. I'm already doing this. And they enjoyed it, which is the thing that I found very interesting was the article in the New York Times. The women were very upset about the cannery closing. That was their life. That was their friends, their family, their social connection to the community. So the canneries going left a huge void. And that's what this whole thing is kind of about.
This next slide, it's the painting right over on the wall there. It's another version of the same scene, but
yeah, I like to paint and sculpt from the same idea. It's not from the same sketch, but it portrays the same thing, and it gives the show some dimensionality if you can go back and forth between the sculptures and the paintings. So sometimes I'll do that. And this one, I'm excited about the colors in this one, particularly that teal green with that orange apron. And in one of the pictures, when I was looking through the historical pictures, they were wearing these sort of plastic bib overall things, these coverall over aprons. But if you look very carefully, you could see at the edge this very pretty flower apron. And it kind of struck in my mind that there were these women were doing this really just terribly smelly, oily, greasy, nasty job. And yet they took the time to have this flower apron on to maintain their femininity, their dignity, their individuality. And I was like, you know, that's something beautiful. And adding those little tiny little elements in wherever I could was just a really fun part of the project.
Matt, can you show me the catalog? And
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just going to show this for the people at home. This painting is on the cover of the catalog, which we just got into the gallery. It's 48 pages long, and I hope you will all want to have a copy.
That's lovely. Nice job on the catalog.
Yeah. This next sculpture is the bust of the Cannery Girl and the bust of the Downey's Kid. You want to talk about these? They're what, 32 inches high? They're quite stunning.
Their size is quite overpowering, but I started out small with these heads. When I was making the bigger sculptures, I had a scrap pile, my burn pile, and they were just short little pieces, maybe 4 inches by 6 inches or whatever. Yeah, these little guys. And instead of burning them, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to play with these, and I started making these little blocky looking heads. And I had so much fun making them that I started to go bigger and bigger. I made one half this size. So it was about a foot and a half, 18 inches. And then I went bigger. And I think this one is at 36 inches. And my next one is going to be in my yard, and it's going to be 6 feet tall. And so the two of these, the Cannery Girl and the Downey's Kid, is the sort of the romance in my mind of the guy that went out to sea to fish in the cannery boat, and the girl that stayed on the shore and worked in the factory. And it's sort of this wonderful little waltz in my mind of, you know, of the Downey's girl and the, you know, this kid that worked on the boat.
Well, you know, I kind of saw the same thing, because I said in this show, the two main characters are the Cannery Girl and the Downey's Kid. And there's definitely, this has got the wrong title on it. There's definitely a love story going on here, at least in my mind. And he's kind of a hero, right? Portrayed as a hero.
I'm not sure.
Well, I kind of think it is.
They're
Almost like a self-portrait.
well, the Downey's Kid, I guess, would be me in essence, because I was raised in this sort of environment down east here. And a lot of this show is pulled in memories from going into Dunbar's store and like trying to remember what was on the shelf at Dunbar's store when I was a kid in Sullivan, when I went in. And, you know, pulling those memories back was a really huge part of this art installation. And kind of revisiting my youth. That was an exciting part of this project as well.
Yeah, it's nice to be able to revisit it, isn't it? In this manner.
It is, for sure.
So here we have a picture of the installation of the groceries from the Cantown store and a close-up of the red snapper hot dogs. You want to tell us about those,
Yeah,
Matt?
let's talk about the side on the left there. These are labels that are inspired by ones from before, but there are actually some labels that I actually use from actual companies like B&M Baked Beans and the One Pie Squash can, which I love One Pie Squash, and they make the best pies. But the ones that I imagined were sort of fun as well. The brown bread in a can, that was with the B&M Baked Beans and the red snappers. I mean, there's your meal right there. And so the Cantown red snappers, that was sort of one of those light bulb moments. I found this metal tray at a yard sale or something, and I painted it white, like the styrofoam that you get your meat on. I cut up some hot dogs out of wood, painted them as red as I could get them, and shrunk wrap them in plastic and hand painted a label. And I kind of want to think that it's a miniature sort of class Oldenburg reference there. Because I loved his store that he created in Manhattan as well, with the pastry shelf, I think. Insane, right? Anyway, so that's sort of a little bit of a Oldenburg reference there.
This next slide shows two paintings, which is kind of a take on the Groceries, but a painting.
Well, yeah, and some of the paintings kind of almost look like advertising pieces. And so the one on the left, the one we're looking at, is the one with the scissors.
Yes,
that is a bit of a advertising piece, I guess you could say, almost like a poster or something that would have been in a store. But I really enjoy putting those elements together and keeping them separate and distinct, showing sort of the disconnection of the end of the cannery caused this sort of fracturing of the Down East culture. In our minds and in our hearts, it kind of like, you couldn't put the pieces back together again. And so there's a lot of pieces in the show that have this sort of a feeling of a dream or a feeling of a memory that you can't quite put your finger on. And there's actually some of these which are called dreams as well.
Yeah. So this next slide has a couple of more characters, and I love the guys on the left, fast food eaters.
Yeah, that's a blatant Van Gogh reference. The potato eaters, these guys are the fast food eaters. And yeah, Tom Sachs built a McDonald's, fast food McDonald's, like kiosk kind of thing. I was fascinated with it. And so anyways, the McDonald's logo is just this wonderful icon that I wanted to play with as well. But you can imagine these are just working guys grabbing their lunch. I've got the Stinson Packing Company label on one of the hats, and then the Ford truck on the other guy. I love the trucker caps, especially when I remember when growing up, you'd have the guy that would buy the new truck from Darlings right down the road, and they'd have their brand new cap with their truck. And you could tell that person was quite content with themselves at that point. They'd arrived. They made it.
I will say you did a really nice job painting the burgers, because they actually look pretty good.
Thank you.
Not just artistic. This next slide is another woman.
Yeah.
And a vase of flowers in a brown bread can. Right.
So the girl on the left, that's sort of more of the romance of the girl waiting for the husband to come in from working on the boat. He's not dead. That's what some people thought, but he's sort of under the boat, working on the under part of the boat, which is another series that I've been working on for the last 5 years.
Painting over in the corner,
which is called
far left.
Which is called Boat. And so I've got guys working on the boat on the shore. So I kind of did another Van Gogh move where I pulled a painting and put it inside my other painting. But the girl on the left, this is the one with the girl with the she's drinking some Allen's Coffee brandy, which is this sort of omnipresent Down East thing. So I was just pulling in as much Down East culture as I could at this point, and not being very shy about it. And the still life is kind of fun in its own way. It's got the cans. Some of them are referencing the labels that I came up with, and just sort of a standing pair of scissors adding to that composition.
So let me ask you, Matt, her eye, some people have commented on it. It looks very Egyptian. Oh, is that just accidental?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
No.
I actually was looking at some Egyptian art for a while, but she could be Native American. She's got the very dark black hair. There's a lot of Native Americans.
When my friend came in to see the show and she saw that painting, she said that could be a painting of her grandmother's life and her grandfather. She said her grandmother that worked at Stinson's all those years had dark hair, and she wore it in a bun all her life, just like the picture. And her husband was a lobsterman, and like many lobstermen, he kept his lobster boat in the yard. And one day he was out working on the boat and he fell off the boat in the yard. And so she said that could easily be a picture of that scene actually happening. I thought it was very funny.
I think they call that kismet or something when you do something like that and it actually frames in someone's story, which I was actually really excited to hear about that.
Yeah, I was excited to hear about it too. I thought it was quite entertaining. This next one is one of my favorites. It's called The Legend of Evelyn Davis, and it's a wood relief right here. Tell us who Evelyn Davis is.
She was I've always known her as an older woman. She went to the same congregation as me growing up. And I never knew she worked at a cannery until later on. But I found out that she was, like you said, quite fast. And so I thought, you know what? I knew this lady. She was one of the sweetest people I've ever met. And I thought, why don't I make a piece about her being very fast? And so I called it The Legend of Evelyn Davis, which is kind of an interesting name because if you met her, she's very humble and quiet, and you would never know that, you know, she was quite legendary as well. But that's how a lot of people are when you meet them down east. You'll never know who or what they do unless you spend time with them or hear from someone else. So, yeah.
This next slide is kind of a take on the Maine signposts that you see everywhere, where all the signs are stacked up on the same pole, and they're both in that corner. And there's a third one in the hallway. They're wood reliefs by Matt.
Yeah, they're kind of like the way to get to Jonesport, which is a long and circuitous road in and of itself, I guess. I'm fascinated by these little towns and these peninsulas you have. Where we've been talking about Deer Isle. You got Jonesport. Down where I'm from, we have Hartswell, and then you're on Route 1, and you have to take these long, winding roads, 30 or 40 minutes just to get to these towns. And it's easy to get lost along the way. But especially in my mind, Jonesport is this sort of mythical place for me in my mind. It's just this wonderful village set in the middle of nowhere. And they had their own canneries. And so I wanted to make these very, I think they're called the mythology of Jonesport. If you look on the back of them, I don't know if, but anyway.
Oh, that's the one in the stairwell.
There you go.
Yeah, these two are the
like
signposts.
The mythology of Jonesport is like this idea that, you know, these titans lived in Jonesport, titans of the lobstering industry. And if you follow the history of the lobster boat, it really had its breakaway origins in Jonesport when they first started to motorize them and they first started to get them going as fast as they could go. And so, you know, if you go to Jonesport, it has a lot of Maine culture and history.
This next one, the one on the right, the Cannery Girl profile is quite large. It's about 40 inches high. It's a wood relief. It's right in the back of the room here. And right next to it is that little sculpture, Four Corners, Columbia Falls, which if you've been down east, you're real familiar with that because that's where the grocery store is, right?
Yes, exactly. And that's actually how you get to Jonesport. So it kind of connects with those last two pieces as well. The profile though, that is, I use a lot of reclaimed boards and wood. So her face is made out of barn boards that I pulled out of the dump. And so if you see all those holes, that's how many times that barn had been re-roofed in the last 200 years. I figured those boards, when the trees started growing, are roughly 300 years old. So that one's kind of interesting.
You're talking about the one on the wall?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that one has a lot of texture and fun to it. But I really am playing with that profile a lot right now, and with that little bun in the back. And then the one on the left, which is the signpost to get to Jonesport as well. When I was making these, I started to sort of put together stuff in what I call bricolage, which is just sort of fastening things together very quickly. And that piece is one that I'm really excited about. And if I remember correctly, there's a sculptor named Tinguely, is that his name? And he made these really fascinating built pieces that were just these wild things with wheels and they moved and things. And I found out, ironically, that he in the 1960s built a machine that you could put tokens in, and the machine would run for about 30 minutes and would make you a drawing. And I saw a picture of one of the tokens, which comes back all the way back to the Cantown store. His name was Tinguely, and a fabulous artist. But anyways, this one kind of inspired by him a little bit, I think.
Yeah,
Even,
well,
not even in the moment, but looking at it now, I see his influence.
Well, and they're really nice together too, because you've got a mirror image of the bust
The
in the
profile. And the
sculpture
colors.
and the colors. Yeah, I love
Yeah.
those two together.
I'm
Really
using
nice.
a lot more boat paint colors moving forward from back in the day till now. So you have this sort of petite manan boat colors, the orange, the teal, and the white in that one, which I'm liking.
We're just going to admit somebody who's coming in late. Yep. This next one is called The Machinations of Cantown.
Machinations.
Machinations.
Yeah, going into the factory.
This is the sculpture in the hallway there, the
relief
wood
one.
relief,
Yeah.
yes.
My dad taught me to make wood reliefs when I was a kid. And so I go back to them every now and again because they're quite fun to make. And I like to use elements of bare wood whenever I can, and burlap and metal. And so as many different items as I can use within a range. I mean, I don't get too crazy, but this one has all of the elements of Cantown, and they're separated into individual sections, sort of giving you that feeling of the loss of Cantown, of the loss of the canneries, how it got separated and split apart. But the elements are there, the scissors, the fish, the profile of the face with the working hand, and even a metal can in there as well.
You have a really nice sense of relationships, spatial, not only spatial, but color.
Thank you.
That you see throughout all your work. And it's just interesting where you're self-taught, you know, how innate that ability is.
Well, even when you're self-taught, you have to follow the strictures that you've sort of compelled yourself to create as an artist, you know, keeping everything within within the frame. You know, if you look, most of the pieces are tightly compacted inside. I don't have like a part of a boat, you know, going off the canvas and different things. So for me, it's like you just create those different rules and you just abide by them, I guess, when you're working.
Well, I think some of it isn't innate. You know what looks interesting. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You do. I mean, and some
you.
people are better at it than other people. You just naturally know, you know, how to put the shapes together because they are within the square or the rectangle or whatever. But when you look at them, all the negative shapes, like in all the paintings across this wall, they're all interesting. In addition to the object itself, but the space around the object is all interesting. There's a lot of dynamic going on. You know what I mean? With the different, like this one here, the big one with the big head and the glove and the three fish.
Well, thank you.
Yes. So this next one are two more sculptures.
Two more of the factory pieces. So it would be the labeling machine and then the mustard hopper. And so the mustard hopper was one that was from one of those grassroots sort of conversations. I had a guy come into my studio and told me when he found out I was working on the Cannery show that he used to work in a cannery in Lubeck, and that the worst part of the job was cleaning up the mustard under the mustard hopper. So you know those the cans, they would put spices in them and mustard or whatever they were going to put in with the fish. And he said that the mustard hopper was always a pile of mustard everywhere. And so at the end of the day, he would hose down the factory and all that mustard would go out in the bay. And he said the whole bay would be turned yellow.
Oh my God.
And I was thinking, what an environmental disaster, but also what a fascinating like picture in my mind. And so this little factory piece, the mustard hopper, was the idea of that messy, sloppy part of the process.
The mustard hopper is actually in the back room because we had to move it to get the chairs in for the talk, but we'll bring it back out as soon as we're.
And the one on the left is the labeler, which was where I would imagine how the labels would go on the cans.
Fascinating.
This is a lady cutting fish and heads off. Where is that piece?
She's right behind you.
Okay, yeah, this girl right here. I found a piece of burlap that was similar color yellow that I've been using in the painting. So the coloring on her kind of works out with the rest of the show. But yeah, recently I've been working on my sculptures showing sort of the weight of work. And so she's kind of stooped forward, showing that years and years of doing the same thing over and over again has given her sort of this slump a little bit.
And then the matched pair to that would be the mackerel
This
basket.
guy has a WPA 1930s art piece look to it, the working worker kind of. But when I was making it, I had sketched it, and then see how far forward he's leaning. I have no idea how it stands up, but it does. It doesn't look like it should be able to.
Yeah, that's this guy right here.
But it's quite stable. You know, when I make something, I try to like bump into it to see if it's going to fall over. You see, this one is quite stable, even though he's lurched quite a bit forward.
So these last two, those were just two views of the same sculpture.
Yeah.
And then the last one we have to show people would be the boat work,
Yeah, this is the boat work one that kind of.
which is next door in the other building.
Yeah, these guys are working on their boat. Just the kid is there. Everyone's working on this boat. Yeah, pretty. I like this one. It's got a folky art sort of a feeling as well, a little bit.
Well, a lot of people have liked that piece. It's quite large. It's
Mhm.
it's what, 24 inches high by 36 inches
Yeah,
wide.
it's quite big.
Yeah, it is quite large. So it's a pretty interesting piece. So that concludes the slideshow. If anybody in the live audience has any questions, we'll take those first, and then we'll open it up to the people on Zoom. Anybody have any questions?
I have gotten the question, when do I sleep? It's a rare lately.
Did you always know that you were going to be a painter, for example, when you graduated high school? And I don't know whether you went to college or started working, but at some point did you, because you obviously did a lot of art when you were younger, at any point did you begin to doubt that this might be a viable thing for you?
Yeah, I think many times, you know, every time I would set up in a new area, like we moved to the West Coast, I probably didn't make art for a few months, but then inevitably I'd find a corner of the apartment and start making something, painting or sculpting. You do struggle with that. I mean, when my boys were little, I definitely stopped making art for a while just so I could be around for them. But it was always something that I couldn't ignore, kind of a nagging, I guess you could say, that I always wanted to, compelled to do it. I was raised with my dad in the studio, so it really comes second nature for me.
Well, I think too, if you have a parent that is successful as an artist, that you would be more encouraged to pursue that as a
My father was
vocation.
successful businessman, I always hated it.
Well, that usually happens.
I swore I would never do that.
Yeah. But I mean, to have a role model, I mean, when I moved to Ellsworth in the 1970s, there was no art scene down east, really. I mean, there were a few galleries. Norma Marin had a gallery up in John Marin's house down in Addison. And, you know, there was probably a gallery or two, but it's a very quiet scene. But I don't think it was till the 80s, you know, the 80s and the 90s that it really took off.
And to that question, one more thing, me and my dad always kind of encourage each other to keep going. He's always been my biggest fan, always kind of inspiring me and, you know, saying, hey, keep going, you're doing good. So that was always a good thing. And now it's going both ways. Like, we encourage each other to keep working. If he gets in a slump, I'll help him. Or if I am working on something, I need help, he'll help me.
I remember the Einstein installation, a table, a bench, and I guess a roof.
Yeah.
Which I was really impressed with that. I thought it was great. I like physics, so
That was like,
so I thought that was wonderful.
1990, I think, 1992. Yeah.
No, I was just gonna say, don't forget genetics. So you had genetics and environment.
Right.
Working for it.
I think that would be an interesting study too, to see what the genetics does play when it comes into creative people. There's got to be some sort of, like you said, with the environment and genetics and everything kind of coming together. Yeah. Mother.
I just want to comment, coming from Phil, you have such a unique style. There's no reason to look at that and say, well, that's Phil Barter there, part of Phil Barter. You're so unique, and I'm really proud how you've taken off and you just have your own beautiful style. I'm just really impressed.
Thank you very much. That's why I keep going. What's that?
Did you have to wrestle with Morrison Hartley at all?
Yeah, I did. And the way I did that was I I worked on a tribute show actually with my dad. So I did a tribute to Marston Hartley. That was like 5 or 6 years ago. And I went into my favorite Hartley paintings and I painted versions of them in my own style. And it got me to the point where I was like, okay, comfortable with this. And you've got to transcend those things. You've got to move past them. Not that you would be better than him, but you have to see that and say, okay, I got to get beyond this or I'm just going to get stuck here. The worst thing is to get stuck anywhere in time that's not now. You have to work in the present. If an artist is working in the past, then he sort of anachronized himself. What were you going to say, Dad? Sorry.
No, I was gonna say, Matt and I had our first father and son show at the Maine Gallery when we were starting about 16.
Yeah.
In Louisville.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that helped a lot too. My dad would go in and say, hey, when are you gonna start showing my son? So that helped a lot too.
You're
So,
also in Edwards here, right?
yeah,
You got a lot of stuff in their basement.
yeah.
For a while.
And now I'm inspired by Matt's work. I'm looking at his new landscapes and I'm really impressed with his simplicity and his palette. His palette is really becoming sophisticated now.
Thanks, Dad.
Were you purposely thinking of, I'm sorry, I'll take this stuff, multiracial? I mean, when I think of Downey's Maine, I don't necessarily think of, inclusivity and all that.
As far, not in particular, but I do know that I have quite a few friends down east that are Native American. So they're, as far as the color palette on the skin, it wasn't specifically thinking in that direction, but sometimes things just happen that way where you're painting along and you have a certain color and you just use it. I mean, that happens more often than not with many of my paintings. I'll be working with a certain gray and it'll go from here to there,
Yeah.
But as far as the darkening of the skin, the other thing that people don't realize when I do these sort of reddish, let's see, like this guy, this is actually a Hartley reference. When he painted his Downey's Fishermen, they always had those sunburnt faces with the bleached white hair. And if you've ever worked on a lobster boat, you get so tan in the summer because you have no cover, no protection. And I worked on a lobster boat, so I can attest to this color right here. So yeah, it's not a multiracial thing. It's more weathered,
Yeah.
but not really thinking about it. And so in that way, that's how the flesh color ended up in those different variations.
I did want to say something about Vanity and that painting with her husband who fell off the lobster boat. Not only does that painting look like her, I'm only saying this because tonight we have red snappers in a blanket, pigs in a blanket, but red snappers were her favorite food. So we've got the whole thing from this woman's story all the way around. Yeah. So,
Those red snappers are illegal in 33 states.
It's beet juice. They're tinted by beet juice. It's nothing radioactive.
I would just add one other thing because I keep looking at this and I keep remembering when my daughter was little and she'd play at, creating these stores and on the playground and, under the sideboard and stuff. There's just an enthusiasm about it that's infectious. There really is, there's a kind of a playfulness and enthusiasm at the same time as it's a very serious subject of things kind of coming undone. So I really.
Well, thank you. And that was one of my favorite things when one of my brothers or sisters would set up a store in their room and you would go in with fake money and you'd buy stuff. I mean, that was like one of the funnest things to do, and definitely bringing that sort of childlike excitement is part of what I'm working with. When I see something, I want to think from a very naive perspective. So when I was working on this show, I didn't saturate myself with the reality of what the cannery was. I only picked and chose what I wanted to be inspired by. So keep that naivety as long as I
We
can.
haven't mentioned these, but the small figures you see everywhere that Matt's created, including
Pass me this chainsaw.
The chainsaw. He calls these they're remembrances from childhood, and they're titled Downey's action figures. And so like G.I. Joe and I don't know what they all are because I had girls, not boys.
Yeah.
But
So if you were a boy, you would get the minifigure, the action figure, but then you'd buy the expansion pack, which had the weapon or the whatever items it was, but that was sold separately. Remember, each sold
I
separately.
didn't have boys, so we didn't get any action figures.
So yeah, these action figures have like little expansion packs.
Yeah. So
Each
these are
sold separately.
actually, they're actually quite charming. The
Thank
people have
you.
been looking at them all night on Zoom because that's what we've been showing
Oh,
in
good.
in the video.
When he was 12 years old, I painted his name on the chainsaw, and that really inspired me.
See?
Yeah.
And Tom Sachs made a chainsaw. I think it was the Coco Chanel chainsaw. And I thought that was just so amazing. He's really good at taking like luxury brands and putting them on ordinary things to sort of connect to very different things. But anyways, that's another story.
Yeah, well, I think you're right, Marcia. He has a great sense of humor and he brings that childlike perspective to it that makes it a lot of fun.